The evening settled over the city like a soft gray blanket. And for the Grand Royal Conservatory of Music, it meant a change of guard. The daytime flurry of anxious students and stern professors faded away, replaced by a deep, resonant silence. This was when Alara's world began. She was 17, but in the echoing halls of the conservatory, she felt both ancient and invisible, a ghost haunting a place where her spirit didn't quite belong. Her father, a man whose quiet strength was as solid as the marble floors he polished, was the head janitor. Every night, Alara would join him after her own school day ended. It was their time, a ritual understood without needing many words. She would pull on her worn sneakers and grab a cleaning cart, the squeak of its wheels the first note in the night's symphony. The air always smelled the same, a mix of lemon-scented wax, old wood, and the faint, lingering perfume of the musicians who had long since gone home. They worked in a comfortable rhythm. Her father in the main lobby, while she took the long corridor of practice rooms. She'd push her cart slowly, stopping at each door. Some were left ajar, and she would peek inside. She saw the remnants of the day's struggles, a crumpled piece of sheet music, a broken pencil point, a coffee cup stained with the imprint of a desperate lip. She could almost feel the frustration that had hung in these small rooms. The countless hours spent trying to tame a wild note or perfect a difficult passage. She felt a strange kind of pity for them. They had all the lessons, all the expensive instruments, and all the pressure. But she wondered if any of them truly listened. From one room, a metronome had been left on, its steady, unyielding click, talk sounding like a lonely heart. Alara stood in the doorway for a moment, her head cocked. To her, it wasn't just a timekeeper. It was the pulse of the building, a low, constant beat that everything else danced around. She heard the gentle hum of the air conditioning through the vents, a high, airy hum that sounded like a choir of tiny violins. The drip of a faucet in a distant bathroom was a percussive counterpoint, a random but perfectly placed cymbal crash. These were the sounds that others ignored, the background noise of their lives. To Alara, they were music. Her father never questioned her habits. He knew his daughter was different. He saw the way her eyes would glaze over as she stared at the grand piano in the empty concert hall, the way her fingers would tap out silent rhythms on her own thighs. He was a simple man who understood things with his heart, and his heart told him that his daughter held a world of sound inside her, a world no one else could hear. He never pushed, never asked. He just made sure the side door was unlocked for her and saved her a piece of the dessert he brought for his lunch tonight. As she finished polishing the brass plaques on the walls, the building felt especially still. Her father gave her a small nod, his face tired but kind, and headed down to the basement to restock his supplies. This was her signal. The official part of her work was done. Now her real work could begin. She left her cleaning cart parked by the elevators and walked, not towards the exit, but deeper into the belly of the conservatory. Her sneakers made no sound on the thick carpet that led to the main auditorium. Pushing through the heavy double doors, she stepped into a vast moonlit space. The auditorium was a sleeping giant. Rows of empty red velvet seats stretched out before her like a silent waiting crowd. And there, in the center of it all, bathed in a single, dramatic beam of moonlight from the high-arched window, was the reason she came. The Steinway grand piano, it was more than just an instrument to her. It was a creature. Its black, glossy body seemed to breathe in the quiet air. The lid, propped open just a crack, looked like a sleepy eye. The 88 black and white keys were a perfect, silent city, and she knew every street, every building. She had never had a lesson in her life. Her family could never have afforded it. But she had been learning for years, sitting right here in the dark. She didn't go on the stage. That felt too bold, too much like trespassing. Instead, she slipped into the front row, settling into a seat that had been worn smooth by thousands of attentive listeners. She leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, and just looked at the piano. She imagined the weight of the keys beneath her fingers, the way they would give way just enough to produce a sound. She imagined the vibration traveling up through the wood, into her hands and up her arms, filling her entire body. Closing her eyes, she began to listen. Not to the silence, but to the music that was always there. The low hum of the lights became the bass line. The whisper of the wind outside was a soft string section. The rhythmic ticking of that forgotten metronome, still audible from down the hall, was her percussion. She let the sounds wash over her, weaving them together in her mind. A melody began to form, something sad but strong, something that spoke of loneliness and hope all at once. It was a story of a girl who lived in the shadows but dreamed in color. Her fingers began to move. Twitching slightly on her lap, she was playing it, her fingers pressing down on the denim of her jeans as if they were the ivory keys. She could hear every note perfectly in her head, a complex and beautiful piece that existed only for her in this empty hall. She was the composer, the conductor, and the entire audience. The silent auditorium was her concert hall, and the sleeping piano on stage was her orchestra. Waiting patiently for the day, its voice would finally be allowed to join hers. For now, this was enough. This secret, silent performance was the most real thing in her life. The silence in the auditorium was a living thing. It had weight and texture, and for Alara, it was usually a comfort, a familiar blanket. But tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like a challenge. As she sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on the grand piano, bathed in moonlight, the silence was no longer enough. The silent concert in her head, the tapping of her fingers on her worn jeans, it suddenly felt hollow, like an echo of an echo. A deep, restless ache had settled in her chest. A yearning so powerful it made her hands tremble. She thought of her father, probably down in the basement now, sorting through cleaning supplies. His mind on simple, practical things. He would never understand this pull, this desperate need that felt as essential as breathing. He saw the piano as a fragile, expensive object, a thing to be dusted and admired from a distance. He didn't see it as she did, as a living creature with a voice that was trapped. Waiting for someone to set it free, the thought came to her not as a conscious decision, but as a wave of emotion that washed away all her fear. Just one note. The idea whispered in her mind, soft and tempting, just to hear what it really sounds like. Just one. Her heart began to beat a little faster, a frantic drum solo against the quiet hum of the building. She stood up, her knees feeling weak. The red velvet seat sighed as her weight left it. Each step toward the stage felt like a milestone, a crossing of an invisible line she had never dared to approach before. The aisle seemed to stretch on forever, the empty seats watching her like a silent jury. She reached the stairs leading up to the stage, her hand hovering over the velvet rope that blocked the way. With a deep breath that tasted of dust and old wood, she unhooked it and stepped onto the polished wooden floor. The stage felt like another world. Up here, the air was different. The moonlight was brighter, the silence deeper. She was standing next to the piano, so close she could see her own reflection distorted in its glossy black side. She looked like a stranger, a pale, wide-eyed girl who didn't belong. She reached out a hand, her fingers shaking, and let them rest on the smooth, cool wood of the lid. A shiver ran through her. It was real. Slowly, she walked around to the bench. It was a simple wooden stool, unassuming compared to the magnificence of the instrument itself. She hesitated for a long moment, just looking at the keys. They were perfect, a row of white rectangles bordered by thin black lines, a promise of infinite possibilities. She had seen them in her dreams 1,000 times, but seeing them up close, feeling the cool air radiating from them, was something else entirely. She sat down. The bench was hard and unforgiving. She placed her hands in her lap, then lifted them and hovered them over the keys. Her fingers curved just as she had imagined them countless times. Her right index finger, trembling slightly, descended toward a white key in the middle of the keyboard. It felt like it was moving in slow motion. The moment her fingertip made contact, a jolt went through her. The ivory was cool and smooth, with a slight grain she had never expected. She pressed down. A single note bloomed in the darkness. It was a pure, its clear C, and it hung in the air of the vast auditorium like a single perfect star. The sound was richer and more complex than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a tone. It was a vibration that she felt in the wooden bench, in the floorboards, and deep in her own chest. It echoed for what seemed like an eternity, a beautiful, lonely sound that asked a question of the empty room. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound. Charged with the memory of that note, tears welled in Ilar's eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But it was being pushed aside by something much stronger, a sense of rightness, of coming home. She had crossed the line, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, for the first time, it felt like it was truly beginning. Her fingers, no longer trembling, found their place again. This time she didn't think. She didn't plan. She just let go. The music that had been building inside her for years, the symphony of squeaking wheels and humming vents and lonely metronomes, finally found its voice. It began quietly, a simple, melancholic melody that seemed to tell the story of the empty hall itself. Her left hand found a bass line, a low, rhythmic pulse that sounded like the steady, determined work of her father's cleaning cart. Her fingers moved with a mind of their own, dancing across the keys and patterns she had never been taught, but somehow knew. The music grew, becoming more complex and more confident. It was filled with strange, beautiful chords that didn't follow the rules she had overheard from the students, but they felt right. They were the sound of shadows, of echoes, of things seen but never acknowledged. It was the sound of her life, high above the auditorium. In a soundproofed office lined with books and awards, a man was scowling at a sheet of manuscript paper. Maestro Alistair Finch, a man whose name was synonymous with musical genius, was stuck. The notes on the page felt dead, lifeless. He crumpled the paper in his fist and tossed it into a wastebasket, already overflowing with his failures. He leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He felt old, uninspired, a fraud. And then he heard it. At first it was so faint he thought he was imagining it. A simple melody, drifting up through the air vents. He frowned, assuming one of the more arrogant students had left a recording playing to annoy the others. He was about to get up and investigate when the music changed. It grew in complexity, a raw, untamed beauty weaving through the simple melody. There was a power to it, an emotional honesty that made him sit up straight. He got up and walked to the vent, pressing his ear close. The sound was clearer now. It wasn't a recording. He could hear the subtle imperfections, the faint sound of the damper pedals, the very breath of the instrument being played live. The music was unlike anything he had ever heard. It was technically unorthodox, breaking rules he had spent a lifetime teaching, yet it was utterly captivating. It spoke of a deep well of sorrow, but also of incredible strength. It was the sound of someone who had nothing, but had everything to say. He rushed to his office door, flinging it open and stepping into the hallway. The music was louder here, a ghostly melody leading him down the corridor. He walked faster, his heart pounding with a mixture of frustration and awe. Who was this student? Which one of his pupils had been hiding this kind of raw genius? He reached the heavy double doors of the main auditorium and pushed them open just a crack. Peering inside, the stage was bathed in moonlight. And sitting at the grand piano, her body swaying with the music, fingers flying across the keys, was a girl he had never seen before. She was dressed in simple clothes, her hair was unbound, and she played with an intensity that was both fierce and fragile. She was not one of his students. She was a ghost, a miracle, a mystery. Alistair Finch, the man who thought he had heard everything, stood in the darkness, completely and utterly shocked. The music world, he realized, was about to be turned upside down. The next few days at the conservatory were different. The usual quiet hum of focused practice was replaced by a buzz of nervous energy. It was in the air, a crackling tension that Ilara could feel even from the other side of the walls. Posters had appeared everywhere, with bold, elegant letters announcing the annual Emerging Artist Competition. To the students, it was everything. It was a chance, a dream, a validation of all the years of sacrifice and hard work. The grand prize was a full scholarship to the most prestigious music academy in the world and a solo performance with the city's Philharmonic Orchestra. For them, it was a ticket to the future. Ilara would watch them from a distance as she pushed her cleaning cart. She saw them huddled in groups, their voices a flurry of excited whispers. She heard the names they dropped, the famous pianists they aspired to be, and she heard one name more than any other: Maestro Alistair Finch. He was the final judge. It's the man whose opinion could make or break a career. To them, he was a god, a gatekeeper to the world they so desperately wanted to enter. To Alara, he was just the man who had listened from the shadows, a mysterious figure whose presence made her secret feel even more dangerous. The envy she felt was a sharp, bitter taste in her mouth. It wasn't jealousy of their talent or their expensive instruments. It was a deeper, more painful longing. She saw them practicing in the glass-walled rooms, her fingers flying across the keys with a speed and precision she could only dream of. But sometimes, as she listened, she felt something was missing. Their music was perfect, flawless, but it felt empty, like a beautiful house with no one living inside. They were playing the notes, but she wasn't sure they were feeling the music. Her own silent compositions, born from the hum of the building and the beat of her own heart, felt more alive to her than the most perfect Chopin etude she overheard. This thought only deepened her despair. She had the soul, but they had the stage. High in his office, Alistair Finch was a man possessed. The music he had heard that night, the raw, untamed melody played by the ghost girl, had lodged itself in his mind. He found himself listening for it everywhere, in the hallways, in the vents. He became more impatient with his students. Their technically perfect but emotionally sterile performances grating on his nerves. No, 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 he would snap, his voice echoing in the practice room. You are playing the notes, but you are not telling the story. Where is the pain? Where is the joy? He was searching for the source of that haunting beauty. The girl who played with more honesty in her little finger than most of his students had in their entire bodies. But the auditorium remained silent at night. The ghost did not return. Alara had stopped her nocturnal visits to the piano. The fear of being discovered, especially with the maestro now prowling the halls like a restless wolf, was too great. So the music stayed trapped inside her, building up like a pressure behind her eyes. She felt it in the way her hands would clench into fists, in the restless way she paced her small apartment at night. She started writing it down, not in proper musical notation, which she didn't know, but in her own secret language. She used spirals for long, soaring notes and sharp, jagged lines for the dissonant chords. She drew pictures of the sounds she heard. The low, steady hum of the lights was a thick, dark line at the bottom of the page, while the lonely drip of the faucet was a single, perfect circle falling from the top. Her father watched her with a growing concern. He saw the sadness in her eyes, the way she seemed to shrink away from the excited chatter of the students. He saw her frantically scribbling in a worn notebook whenever she thought no one was looking. One afternoon, while cleaning her small bedroom, he accidentally knocked a stack of books off her nightstand. The notebook fell open on the floor. He bent to pick it up, intending to place it back on the pile. But something made him stop. He couldn't read the strange symbols, but he could read the story they told. He saw the passion in the frantic, overlapping lines. He saw the dedication in the filled pages, the ink-stained fingerprints in the margins. He saw a world he never knew existed, a world of sound and feeling that lived inside his quiet, observant daughter. He saw the drawing of the grand piano on the last page, its keys drawn with such love and detail that it seemed to pulse with life. He slowly closed the notebook, his heart aching with a mixture of pride and a profound, heartbreaking sadness. He finally understood. He understood the late nights, the faraway look in her eyes, the silent concerts she held in her head. He understood her dream. That evening, he saw her staring at a competition poster, her face a mask of misery. She looked so small and lost, a single drop of tears tracing a path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away when she saw him, forcing a weak smile. But he had seen it. In that moment, something inside him shifted. He was a simple man who had spent his life cleaning up other people's messes, walking silently in their shadows. But he would not let his daughter's dream be swept away like dust on the floor. On the night of the competition's finals, the conservatory was more alive than ever. The auditorium was filled with people, the air thick with anticipation. The finalists were warming up backstage, their faces a mixture of terror and hope. Ilara helped her father finish his work, her movements slow and heavy. She just wanted to go home, to escape the sound of their success, as her father went to the basement for the final time. He didn't just give her his usual nod. He walked over to a small, unmarked door at the side of the stage, a door used only for moving equipment. He took a small key from his pocket and unlocked it. Then he turned to his daughter, his eyes filled with a gentle, unwavering resolve. "The world is too loud to hear its own heart sometimes," he said, his voice soft but clear, cutting through the noise of the crowd. "It's full of people shouting, trying to be heard. But the real music, the important stuff, it's often quiet. It's whispered." He looked at the notebook peeking out of her bag, then back at her face. "Don't shout, Ilara. Just play yours." He pushed the door open, revealing a dark, narrow corridor that led directly to the side of the stage. The sound of the first finalist playing a brilliant, fiery Liszt piece drifted out. Ilara stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked from the dark opening to her father's kind, encouraging face. He wasn't asking her to win. He wasn't asking her to be like them. He was just asking her to be herself. He was giving her the key. For the first time, the door wasn't just unlocked for her to clean up after the show. It was unlocked for her to step into the light. The intermission lights came up, bathing the grand lobby in a warm, golden glow. The audience spilled out of the auditorium, a sea of rustling programs and murmuring voices. They were all talking about the same thing: the performances. A young man in a crisp suit had played a flawless Rachmaninoff, his fingers a blur of precision and power. A woman in a flowing dress had brought tears to their eyes with a delicate, heart-wrenching Chopin ballade. They were debating who had the best technique, who had the most soul, who Maestro Finch would favor. It was a world of opinions and judgments. A world Ilara had only ever observed from the sidelines. Backstage, the air was thick with a different kind of energy. It was the sharp, metallic scent of fear and ambition. The finalists for the second half were pacing, stretching their fingers, their faces pale under the harsh work lights. Ilara stood in the shadows near the door her father had unlocked, her notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. Her heart was a wild bird trapped in her ribs, beating against her bones. The sounds from the lobby, the confident chatter of people who belonged here, made her feel small and foolish. "What am I doing?" A voice screamed in her head. "I'll be a joke. They'll laugh me right off the stage." She thought about turning back, about slipping through the door and disappearing into the familiar comfort of the dark corridors. She could go back to her silent concerts, her secret world where the music was safe and perfect. But then she remembered the look on her father's face. Not just the encouragement, but the understanding. He had seen her world, and he hadn't called it silly or small. He had called it a heart. And his words echoed in her mind, not as a command, but as a gentle, persistent truth. "Play yours," bell chimed, signaling the end of the intermission. The lobby began to empty as the audience drifted back to their seats. The finalists took their final deep breaths and straightened their postures. This was it. The moment was slipping away. Ilara felt a surge of something, not courage but desperation. It was the feeling of a dream that was about to die, and she knew she couldn't let it go without a fight. She took a shaky step forward, then another. Pushing through the heavy velvet curtain and out into the blinding light of the stage, the house lights were dimming, and a quiet hush was falling over the auditorium. People were settling into their seats, craning their necks for a first look at the next performer. And then they saw her. A collective gasp, like a sudden intake of breath, rippled through the crowd. It wasn't one of the contestants. It was a girl in a simple sweater and worn jeans, her hair untamed, her face pale with fear. A few confused whispers turned into a low murmur. Someone coughed nervously. A security guard near the side of the stage took a step forward, his hand on his radio. Ilara didn't look at the audience. If she had, she would have run. She kept her eyes fixed on the piano, her sanctuary. She walked toward it as if in a trance, each step feeling heavier than the last. She reached the bench and sat down, the worn wood feeling solid and real beneath her. The entire auditorium was holding its breath, waiting for someone to remove her, for the absurd interruption to end. But before the guard could reach the stage, her fingers found the keys. She began to play. It wasn't a melody they recognized. It wasn't Chopin or Bach or Mozart. It was a quiet, rhythmic pulse, a low, steady hum that sounded strangely familiar. It was the sound of a cleaning machine moving slowly down a long, empty hall. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats, exchanging puzzled glances. Then, a higher, tinkling sound joined in, like the delicate chime of a service elevator arriving at its floor. The confusion in the room began to soften, replaced by a dawning curiosity. This wasn't a mistake. This was something else. The music began to build. The simple, rhythmic pulse was joined by a series of disjointed, jarring chords. They were not beautiful. They were harsh and dissonant. The sound of a door slamming shut, of a metal bucket being kicked over, of frustration and loneliness. It was the sound of being invisible, of living in the shadows. The melody was lost in a chaotic storm of sound, a torrent of notes that spoke of struggle and anger. It was the sound of a girl who saw the world from the outside, a world that never saw her back. Some in the audience felt a discomfort, a prickle of unease, but they couldn't look away. They were being told a story, a raw, an unfiltered story that was both foreign and deeply human. In the judge's booth, Alistair Finch was frozen. He had been leaning back, ready to be unimpressed, but now he was leaning forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He knew this sound. He knew this language. It was the same haunting melody he had heard through the vents, but now it was complete, a full, sprawling narrative. He saw the girl he had seen that night, the ghost, and he understood. The jarring chords weren't noise. They were the sound of her life. The rhythmic pulse wasn't just a beat. It was the heartbeat of the building, her constant companion. He wasn't just listening to music anymore. He was seeing through her eyes. And then, just as the chaos reached its peak, something incredible happened. The storm of dissonance began to part. A single, clear note emerged from the noise like a single star appearing in a turbulent sky. It was fragile at first, but it held its ground. Slowly, beautifully, it began to grow, weaving a new melody that was so full of longing and hope, it felt like a prayer. It was the sound of finding beauty in the darkness of a spirit that refused to be broken. The melody soared, lifting the entire auditorium with it. It was the sound of her father's quiet love, of the moonlight on the piano keys, of a dream that had been kept alive in the silence. It was the most beautiful, heartbreaking sound any of them had ever heard. Tears streamed down the faces of people in the audience. They didn't know her story, but they felt it. They felt her loneliness, her struggle, and her unbreakable spirit. The music was technically imperfect, full of strange harmonies and unconventional rhythms, but it was more honest, more alive, than anything they had heard all night. The final note hung in the air, pure and shimmering before it faded into a silence that was more profound than any sound. For a long moment no one moved. No one breathed. The entire concert hall was held captive by the ghost of that melody. Then, a single person in the back row began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate clap. Then another joined, and another. Suddenly, the auditorium erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a tidal wave of raw emotion. People were on their feet, their faces wet with tears, their cheers filling the space with a deafening roar. The security guard, who had been about to step on stage, was now standing with his mouth agape, his hands frozen at his sides. Ilara sat at the piano, dazed and overwhelmed, the roar of the crowd washing over her like a wave. And then a figure emerged from the wings. It was Maestro Finch. He walked past the guard and onto the stage, not to remove the girl, but to stand beside her. He approached the microphone, his own eyes glistening as he looked out at the electrified crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in decades, "we have not just witnessed a performance, we have witnessed a miracle." The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a warm wind that pushed against Ilara, making her feel lightheaded and unreal. She sat frozen on the piano bench, her fingers still resting on the keys. The last vibration of her music a ghost in the air. The world had shrunk to this single stage, this single moment, and the thousands of faces staring up at her were a blur of light and shadow. Maestro Finch's voice, strong and clear, cut through the din. We have not just witnessed a performance, we have witnessed a miracle. The words echoed in her mind, but they didn't make sense. Miracles were things in stories, not things that happened to girls like her. The maestro turned from the microphone and faced her. For a moment, she saw not the famous, intimidating judge, but a man whose eyes were filled with a genuine, awestruck wonder. He gave her a small, reassuring nod, then turned back to the audience, raising his hands to quiet them. Slowly, the deafening roar subsided into a low, expectant hum. "The competition is over," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "There will be no more voting, no more deliberation. To compare what we have just heard to anything else would be an insult to art itself." He gestured towards the other finalists, who were standing in the wings, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and for some, a dawning respect. These young people are brilliant. They are the future of classical music, and they should be proud. But tonight, the past, the present, and the future have all collided on this stage. The prize, the scholarship, the performance with the Philharmonic, it all belongs to her. He pointed a steady finger at Alara, and the auditorium erupted once more. Alara felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. It was the security guard, but his face was no longer stern. He was smiling, a kind, crinkly-eyed smile. "Come on, kid," he said softly. "Let's get you out of here." He helped her to her feet, and her legs felt like they were made of jelly. As he led her off the stage, the lights were blinding, the applause a deafening wave. She stumbled through the curtain and into the relative quiet of the wings, where a small crowd was already gathering. Reporters with cameras, officials in suits, and the other contestants, all looking at her with a new kind of reverence. But she only had eyes for one person. Pushing through the small crowd, she saw him standing by the wall near his cleaning cart, which looked strangely out of place amidst the tuxedos and evening gowns. Her father. He wasn't cheering or clapping. He was just standing there, his face illuminated by the backstage work lights. And a single tear was tracing a path down his weathered cheek. He opened his arms, and she ran into them, burying her face in his familiar worn jacket. She smelled of soap and wax and home. In that moment, the roaring crowd, the flashing cameras, and the promise of a new life all faded away. There was only the steady beat of her father's heart and the quiet, overwhelming pride that radiated from him. He didn't need to say anything. His hug said it all. He had always believed in the heart of her silent world, and now, the whole world was finally listening. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story of the janitor's daughter exploded across the news. It was a tale that everyone wanted to believe in. Headlines called her the ghost of the conservatory, the miracle melody, the girl who taught the maestro to listen. The video of her performance, filmed by an audience member on their phone, went viral. People weren't just watching it. They were sharing it, commenting on it, debating it. Professional musicians wrote long articles analyzing her strange chords and unconventional rhythms. Some dismissed it as amateurish noise, a fluke fueled by a good story, but others, the true artists, saw it for what it was, a raw, unfiltered expression of the human soul. Her music had shattered the polished, perfect world of classical music, forcing people to ask what music truly was. Was it about flawless technique, or was it about telling a truth? Alara had done the latter, and the shockwaves were still being felt. At the conservatory, the atmosphere had changed. The students who had once ignored her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and envy. They would stop her in the hallways, asking her about her technique, her inspiration. She found it hard to answer. How could she explain that her inspiration was the hum of the lights and the rhythm of her father's footsteps? How could she explain a technique she had taught herself in the dark? The conservatory's director, a man who had walked past her 100 times without a glance, now offered her a private studio and the best instructors. But Alara felt more comfortable in the empty practice rooms, where the ghosts of her old self still lingered. A few weeks later, Alara was sitting in a small, sunlit practice room. It was hers now, with a brand new piano and a window overlooking the city. But she wasn't playing the scales or the classical pieces the instructors had given her. She was composing. Her notebook lay open on the music stand, its pages filled with her secret language of spirals and jagged lines. Her fingers moved across the keys, exploring a new melody, one that was different from the storm of emotions she had played on stage. This one was quieter, more hopeful. It's filled with the gentle warmth of her father's hug and the dawning light of a new day. The door to the practice room was open, and Maestro Finch stood in the hallway, listening. He came by every day, but he never interrupted. He never gave her instructions or told her what to do. He just listened. He, the great maestro, had become a student. He was learning from her, learning to hear the music in the silence, the stories in the spaces between the notes. He was rediscovering the passion he thought he had lost, all because a quiet girl had dared to play her heart. Down the hall, near the elevators, her father was waiting. He had finished his work for the day, and his cleaning cart was parked neatly against the wall. He leaned against the wall, his eyes closed, a gentle smile on his face. He was listening to the faint, beautiful melody drifting from the practice room. It was a sound he had never heard before, a sound that was born from his daughter's soul, a sound that was now filling the world. He didn't need a grand concert hall or a roaring crowd. For him, this quiet moment, this simple, beautiful music in a place where he had always been, just a shadow, was the greatest performance of all. His daughter was no longer a ghost. She was a voice, strong and clear, and she was just beginning to sing.